So, welcome everybody to another episode of Software Stream. This time around, it's another OP special. So we are presenting some of the highlights of OP conference in Munich that takes place in July. And before we actually start, I want to make an announcement about next week, because as it happens, we already know what we are going to do next week. And next week we are going to talk about, so I'm going to do this in German because the episode will be in German too, disziplinübergreifende Zusammenarbeit in crossfunktionalen Teams mit Andrea Nuzzi und Cornelia Serafin, und das wird meine Kollegin Lisa machen. Okay, so much for the German part, and today we are going to talk about systems thinking, and my guest is Xin Yao. I hope I pronounced that correctly. So do you want to say a few words about yourself before we start?
Oh, sure. First off, Eberhard, thank you for inviting me to your show. As you can see, I look Chinese. I was born in China, and then I sort of moved to Denmark, which I fell in love with immediately. So I now call it a home today. I have an educational background in theoretical computer science. And I've also always had a strong interest in, how do we solve big problems in the society with software. But then gradually, as every business has now become a software business, more or less, we also have some challenges around the software, which is also something I'm quite interested in. I'm an architect by heart, so. Always been fascinated by design and architecture, try how to make sense of a big complex mess through some structure and boundaries and that sort of thing. So I started off being a developer, obviously, and then migrated to being a software architect. So that was a lot, like 15 years ago. At that time, it was I was proudly practicing big design upfront, creating blueprint and so forth. Then later on, I transferred to more in the, what should I call it, a brownfield kind of architecture, exploring integration patterns and, data process and APIs and so forth. And my most recent activities is in the sociotechnical architecture space, also using, domain-driven design, team topologies and system thinking to architect as in the toolbox. And I think just in the spirit of this talk, I'm really, my current interest is like exploring aging software in aging organizations as the world progresses time-wise only in one direction. So so that's a little bit about me and my background and my interests. I'm an independent consultant. So contextualizing architecture and domain-driven design for clients in Denmark and also in for instance in Germany as well.
Yeah, so that's quite impressive. In your abstract, you said of the talk at OP conference. Actually, I'm going to put a link to that abstract in the show notes. You said that it's hard to make a lasting impact with domain-driven design, team topologies, and in the inverse combi maneuver. Those are probably the three most popular tools for architecture that we have right now. So that's quite a statement to say that you can't, that it's hard to make a lasting impact with that. So can you explain?
Yeah, I can try. So first off, I think all three approaches are very have their strengths in tackling the sociotechnical challenges we face in big and small software organizations. And I'm actually a practitioner of all three, you can say. So. But what I often observe when I say that it's hard to make lasting impact of those is when how these approaches are in reality being applied. in the field. And so my observations is that sometimes they are used as some kind of a symptomatic short-term solution, rather than some fundamental solutions for systemic problem solving. And I can probably, from the outcome and output perspective, right? A lot. Oftentimes, when I go in and offer my consulting services to a client, I see this expectations of being artifact driven toward DDD, right? Let's just say I say, okay, you have these silos, and with the knowledge being spread all over, let's do some event storming to integrate some knowledge. And then one of the first questions I would get is, what output can we get from event storming, right? What do we get out of it? Oh yeah, it's shared knowledge sharing. Oh yeah, that's not concrete enough. And what about how do you document this? So it's a very output driven, you can say, expectations, right? So sometimes also in the context of systems, it's the causality. So that is not instantaneous. So to expect the ROI on these workshops to be immediate and to be based on some output is can be problematic. I'm not saying that it cannot create value. Another thing is that talking about team topologies, for instance, it is often you find the team boundaries based on domain boundaries, and that's also maybe the spirit of the inverse Conway maneuver. And then these teams are sometimes treated as feature factories, right? It's not like the team structure is aligned on the purpose of the problem we're solving. So oftentimes I see. I'm also very sad to sometimes be hired to kick off something, a big change initiative, and that big change initiative would then become some top-down mechanistic planning ceremony, and then you have a partition of domains and systems and teams, and then you do all this. Maybe you even do a reorganization based on some models, maybe Spotify, maybe Safe, maybe something else, and then the teams are then followed up on their individual goals, OKRs and whatever other kind of KPIs. But they are really not measured on their success is usually not based on how well their contribution fit together in the whole. There is not very many relational KPIs that as I see. So that's one of the other things I feel very, very sad about. Sometimes when it's a one-off exercise. So and doing architecture, I've really felt the pain myself when you do some kind of a blueprinting with team topology, with DDD, domain partitioning upfront. That's where you have the least knowledge if you want to launch a new product, if you want to do whatever changes, right? And then eventually things would get fragmented and things will drift. And then at that time, sometimes what I've seen is that because these methods are practiced top down and in a very you can say analytical way, structural way, then when things need to change along the way, then teams feel, oh yeah, somebody else would organize probably another, event storming or another integration discovery event, not me, because someone else arranged this earlier. And so what I often see is that this problems and this new, you can say, prompt for change along the way is handled by the old habits. What I often see is a bilateral agreement between team leads. For me, it's like solving, if you have a puzzle, if you have, children puzzles, child puzzles, right? Maybe you have 2 to 3 pieces that are being optimized in alignment between those 2 team leads, but they are not really minding the picture that is on the cover of the puzzle, so to speak, and sometimes that is needed for things to progress. And I see that all the time in platform teams that got kind of locked up in their API, boundaries, and cannot really evolve the platform boundaries with the change space, right? It's a kind of a local optimization, not with some bad intention on the team leads or on the team. It just happens that way because the system, it's kind of a systemic, right? And so many times also. So one last thing I think that came to my mind is that I see a lot of good DDD practitioners in the individual teams, but the skills are kind of, it's like after half a year and after many months, after some enabling approach, these things remain local. They do not somehow spread, and I think it's because the DDD and its contribution is domain-driven design is relational, and if all the improvement, planning, ceremony, and processes practice as being focusing on the individual teams, what happens within the teams, but not in between the teams, then these things are hard to become relational and get spread. And that's why I felt, this is a complexity. This is a level of complexity that cannot be handled by the power of DDD and team topologies alone, because we're dealing with a multi-dimensional complexity, not only related to software anymore. It's software and people, process, customer, business outcome, product strategy, everything together. And we need some new thinking tools, basically. So don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I see the world in a bit of a rent.
Yeah, and I think I fear that this is really what the problem is in the real world, that the things end up being local optimizations, as you said, and that they don't really fit together, and somehow the rules are followed, but not really, you don't get the outcomes and so on. So I think that's a very good point. I also like that you're using these metaphors like mechanical and factory, which is like, industrial, mindless thing, some kind. Oh, and I remember, Rucklands on Rucklande on YouTube says makes 100% sense, so that's good. And I remember this catchphrase: a good manager will always hit the number, even if the company goes bankrupt over it. So that's maybe one of those things. But anyways, so. Systems thinking seems to be the sort of the solution or the approach that you're trying. So can you talk about systems thinking and what it is and why you believe that it helps to solve these problems?
Yeah. So again, I must humbly state that I am still a student of systems and system thinking. And obviously, as you probably all can hear, that I am having a very pragmatic and application-oriented view to systems thinking. So a lot of other people have theorized much better than I have, but this is my 5 cents. So first off, I also would say that when I started with investigating into system thinking, I felt the phrase system thinking is very vague. So what is a system and why is it in plural form? And it's like a very vague and crummy term, right? And usually when people think about what is a system, the first, I think I wouldn't be wrong that most people think about software systems, right? And then the second common association is, it's not my fault, it's the system's fault. It's like you point at some invisible mechanism at work, repetitive patterns that cause bad things to happen, basically. And then systems thinking. So I started digging into it, and I found out, wow, it's really a mixed bag, basically. So right now, I think of system thinking as kind of a thinking, a new kind of thinking infrastructure, if I may, and that is And that is because I observe the prevailing theory of knowledge, the way we apply knowledge these days, especially in the software space, in our socio-technical system, right? For people not familiar with the term, it's technical, that's software, but the socio system is the teams and the organization and even our customers around the software we create, even the society. So the socio people, socio means people, technical means software. And I feel that a lot of the prevailing theory is based on fragmentation, and that's not a surprise. It's like you break down an inherently complex problem into parts, and then you try to solve each of these parts individually. You try to become the master or experts into it. In fact, I think the definition of an expert in most domains, it's like somebody who knows a lot of things about something very small, domain experts, right? Mm-hmm. It's a specialist kind of definition. And I remember my enthusiasm about this notion in domain-driven design called bounded context. It's very tantalizing because, finally, I have a space, a small space. I can make the language completely consistent. I can write clean code. I can make it really perfect. The world around this context might be very messy. We have politics and we have everything. But I can, I can do some really challenging and fun stuff here in my local space, and I can mind my own business, and that kind of it's even a joy. It's a specialist kind of joy, right? But it's also a symptom of that we. So coming to the first part of system thinking is thinking infrastructure. The first keyword I see is the appreciation of relationality. Relationality, yes. So things being related, not seeing that as enemy, like reducing dependency, reducing coupling. Everything coupling is bad, independence is bad. We want flow in streamlined teams and everything there. So I feel that relation is underappreciated, and the relation-driven design is one of the first things that we probably as an industry, as a community, needs to be better at. And the second thing I want to, so there are four things I think in my mind I want to point out about system thinking. One is relationality. As the appreciation of the world we live in as a web of interconnectedness, and that adds value actually. The second thing is that the appreciation from the whole, while placing yourself outside, right? So basically, to say that means again, you also commented on the feature factory. So not seeing my contribution and what I do as belonging to that small space, call it bounded context or call it a small team, but seeing that, what am I contributing to? How do these product, business, domain, technical decisions fit together? Seeing that the problem I think, every problem we're solving is a solution to a higher order problem. So to see our contribution in that higher order problem is a skill, and is an awareness that a lot of not all techies, including myself, it took me quite a while to get here. So in this sense, it's kind of the purpose-driven design. So it's relation-driven design and purpose-driven design. You can also call it maybe strategic design or contextual design. I think a lot of terms for that. And I think Peter Drucker, so one of the management gurus, he actually said, doing the wrong thing right is not nearly as good as doing the right thing wrong, because at least you're going in the right direction. And I think as a society, right, even as a company, we see this. The globe, our globe, and our every context has very, very limited resources. And how do we know that we're putting the limited resource to create the best value for that larger context? Is it enough that we can define the coolest serverless function? Is it enough that our intellectual challenge is being solved? I think it's okay to do that for a while. I've also been in this space and been digging my technical skills, but sooner or later, I think we will all have to face some larger questions, and that's the second point with system thinking, is stepping outside and look at the system as a whole, asking a contextual question. Those first two points apply to the relationality and the holism that apply to both technical systems and sociotechnical systems, so the human system. And the last 2 points, it's like it's more specific about living systems, like human systems, right? That's about the third point is it's basically appreciation about the living systems special dynamics. And what do I mean by that? If you think about it, if you look at a computer system, the designer, the creator is outside the system. We create even ChatGPT. So there is some designer being outside the system. But in human system, in living systems, and even in ecosystem, in nature, the designer, the actors are inside the system, right? Mm-hmm. So the decisions made by all these parts in the system drive the system to the next non-deterministic state. No matter how hard we try in an organization, it's never possible to do a perfect upfront planning. And then to see, okay, everybody is aligned, or all team leads, here's the march, everybody march to the same beat. It will never stay that way, because we human beings, we are independent decision makers. I mean, even in the sense that we say to our team lead or to whoever that is giving our yearly appraisal, yeah, that's okay. I feel it makes sense. This OKR, but our espoused theory. So meaning that theory we openly say we support, is never the same as the theory in use. So that's a very strong point, because we are in some way all irrational. We won't say what we think to all the people because of psychological safety and because a lot of things. So a living system regenerates itself in a way that is really different than how a machine and software will do. A software, no matter how complex it is, it will only do the complex stuff as we design it to do. Unless it's buggy, then we have to fix it. It can do a lot of complex stuff. It can have eventual consistency. It can interact with humans in different ways. Eventually, it is deterministic. It is predictable. But human systems are not. So this is also in the San Diego School of Cognition called autopoiesis. So that means auto means self, so self-generating. That's as opposed to allopoiesis. Poiesis means generation, creation, right? Allopoiesis are machines. They are created by some other party. And then so that's the third point. That's basically the human complexity is very different from the complexity in the living system is very different from mechanic systems. The final thing, the fourth thing, is I think it's what makes me most hopeful about the use of system thinking. That's about causality. So despite how complex these things are, for instance, when we have worked in a company for a while, we intuitively, have a hunch that there are, there it goes again, that some patterns, some systemic behaviors, some forces that present themselves again and again that produce some, beneficial or dysfunctional outcomes consistently, not randomly or accidentally. So what if we can discover those patterns and we can actually do something about it? What if we can? And I think most of us in the human systems, we have a tendency to point at the system as if we're not in the system, to say, oh yeah, look at this. This is the organizational politics. This is the management system. What can we do? What can I do? We can do nothing about it. But in fact, we are part of that same system, right? So I feel this causality about systems thinking really gives us hope that we can probably have some tools to understand that causality by modeling and articulating those recurring patterns and learning the system language and model the systems in some way, the system that we are ourselves are part of in some way. And then, of course, the next step after understanding is, of course, can we intervene? Can we improve the system based on that understanding? That at a level that is not that is not at the superficial level, but at a level that can cause the prevailing mechanism of the system to work differently, right? And I think in a lot of company we have in a lot of human systems, a lot of these sociotechnical environments like big software organizations, we have an event-driven architecture. And I'm talking about it in a little bit of a derogative sense, because events are like the surface of a big sociotechnical system. And a lot of the times we're putting out fire. We're even applying, event storming as an event handler, right? To deal with some superficial problems. Like we need an output, but we if we do our modeling and understanding system in a deep way, then we can probably impact it in a non-superficial, in a fundamental way. And so those are the 4 points I feel that are the central part of system thinking for me. So relationality, holism, and then the dynamics in living system, and finally causality. And I would like to recommend a model that is about this in the software system. I think a lot of you might be familiar with it. It's Jonathan Smart who has made this, better value, sooner, safer, happier. That is, for me, a systems thinking, a systemic model to approach the software-driven sociotechnical systems. So it's also called BVSSH. So better value. So value is like the holism, thinking about things from the outside, the system from the outside. Sooner, that's more like the efficiency, flow, and feedback loops. Safer, that's the agile. We have the governance, we have the causality, and then the happier, the people around it, right? The teams around it needs to be feeling as an organic whole in it, and not really seeing themselves as isolated from the system itself, almost as victim of the system. So that's a model I feel is quite captive.
Yeah. So thanks a lot. That was a lot of ground that you covered there. I'm afraid we do have a problem because the Zoom license that I'm using for some reason is a basic license. I tried to fix it in the background, but I'm unable to. I will, if this actually ends, if this meeting ends, I will send you an email with the different links in a second, and we would need to stop the stream for a few seconds. I'm pretty sorry about that, but it's beyond my scope to fix that problem.
No, it's an emergent property. We will just cope with it. That's how the systems thinking works. So
okay,
let's do it.
Yeah, we'll see. There were a few remarks. Let me just, one was by Eduardo da Silva. He said, great remarks, seeing any of these methods alone and the autonomy over focus we have been focusing on will not be enough. We really need new ideas to be more adapted in orgs. And Roglande said, a lot of people are not aware about relations and their impact. So I think that was good, and I will put a link to this better value and so on in the show notes.